It's story time. It was the late 1940s. A young Betty was bound to her iron lung while she recovered from several diseases. Without this contraption, she could not breathe. Her mother Sandra sat by her side, clutching her rosary and watching in agony as her little girl struggled to do what she took for granted every day. Weeks later, the inevitable came. What kind of God would allow this to happen? Why would he punish her like this when she had been nothing but devout her entire life? Something irreplaceable had shattered inside of Sandra. On the day of the funeral, Sandra couldn't cry. Her tears were drained from her eyes. She was tired, so tired. And as she sat in the pew after the service, person after person approached her to offer their condolences. The words became meaningless to her. None of these words would ever bring Betty back. Sandra was almost completely checked out when she felt another tap on her shoulder. She reflexively thanked them for coming and turned away. But the hand lingered. Sandra turned around to see a woman in a long red dress that she didn't recognize. She handed her an envelope and a small box and told her to open it when she got home. Sandra was so baffled by the gift, but when she looked back up to ask the woman who she was, she had vanished. Scrawled on the back of the envelope were the words, "The gift of life." Sandra asked the other attendees if they knew who the woman in the red dress was, but no one seemed to know. When Sandra returned home, she placed the box on the table and opened the envelope. It was a handwritten letter with what looked like a list of instructions, and at the top, it read, "How to bring a loved one back." Sandra opened the box. It was a small skull with a bell inside. This bell should ring 1 minute after the spell is completed and successful. It is not advised to ring the bell before then, and if this happens, it is recommended that you try again. Sandra wasn't sure what to make of all this. If it was some kind of a joke, it was at least a unique one that had momentarily taken her mind off of her grief. She read the instructions over again. They didn't seem too complicated. Sandra figured, why not give it a try? She cleared out her altar and placed all the items asked for in the letter and arranged them accordingly. She sliced her hand and poured a few drops into the bowl. She recited the incantation and watched the clock. The candles flickered. A chill shot down her back. 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 50 seconds, 58, 59. The wind blew the curtains, causing a vase to shatter on the ground, which then caused Sandra to hit the altar. The skull with the bell fell to the ground. Sandra stared at the skull. Was that before or after 1 minute? She carefully stood up and investigated each room of the house, calling out her daughter's name.
Are you here?
After checking the last room, she let out an exasperated chuckle and shook her head. This was so stupid. She could not believe she fell for such nonsense. She put out the candles, wrapped her hand, and went to bed. That night, Sandra had a horribly vivid nightmare. She saw Betty in a dark void, struggling to breathe, gasping for air. But Sandra couldn't seem to reach her. Betty kept slipping further and further away. Sandra shot up in bed, sheets completely drenched. What if the spell had actually worked, but she accidentally closed it before Betty could fully return? There was no way Sandra was going back to bed now, and she had to know. She unwrapped her hand, gave her blood, recited the prayer, closed her eyes, and waited. Suddenly, in her mind's eye, she could see Betty just like in her nightmare, in a dark void reaching out to her, gasping for air. Sandra was so overtaken by the image that she instinctively reached her hand out and heard the bell ring. Frustrated, Sandra poured more blood, recited the prayer, and waited again. She did this several times, each time seeing the vivid image of Betty gasping for air and reaching out to her. And each time Sandra would check every room of the house, but never found Betty. Sandra was in a trance, repeating the spell, hearing the bell, checking the house over and over and over and over and over. Baby, I can feel you, I can see you, I can hear you. I'm so close. I don't care how many times it takes. I'm not going to stop trying until you're back in this house. I promise. The night continued on like this. Meanwhile, in the cemetery where Betty was laid to rest.